morning. It's been almost 2 years since I've been up here. So really wonderful to be back. It's been about 20 months since my last talk, which happened pretty close to the first lockdown, and I Zoomed it from home. And I remember being pretty scattered in my mind, and my talk was really scattered. And I remember my wife was very sick, and at the time I was really concerned that she had COVID because it looked like she had all the symptoms. And it turned out to be diverticulitis. I think that's how you pronounce it. Which was a relief, but at the time I was really under a lot of stress, and probably didn't make a lot of sense in my talk at the time. So I'll try and do better this time. It's really a pleasure to be back here. The changes that have happened over the last 2 years are really something to see, and you all should feel very good about how this is developing here. This is just a beautiful site. For those of you who I have not met before, my name is Jennings. My monk name is Kaian, which means peaceful ocean. Sometimes I don't feel like a very peaceful ocean, but I've been a student of Kwang Roshi since 2002, and I am pretty full of anxiety about giving a talk today. And just this is not something I do naturally, so bear with me. I wrote it out so that I wouldn't get lost. We'll see how well that works out. So I first would like to express my gratitude to Roshin Shinko and to Neoze and Kaian and the residents here for keeping the spirit of Sonoma Mountain Zen Center alive over the last couple of years. This has been a really, really rocky time for us all. And this has really been an anchor for me in these times. Sitting zazen in the morning when Neoze and Kaian were doing it out of their house. It was just a really sweet way to start the day. I want to thank them for that. I wrote this talk over the past few weeks. I wrote a little bit every day. Rather than trying to do the whole thing at once. And you know, it's kind of interesting doing it that way because every day is different, and how I am in that day is different each time. So it was interesting having a lot of paragraphs that were written over a period of time. And then I don't know if I put them together very well or not, but this is what I've got. So it might seem a little jumpy and a little out of order at times, so just bear with me, please. There's a text that I would share with you right at the beginning here. For me, it summarizes where I am, where I feel I am right now at this stage of my life. This is the first poem in a larger work called The Song of Awakening, or Shodaka, written in the 17th century by a Chan monk, one of the disciples of the six ancestors, one of his primary disciples. And his Japanese name is Yoka Genkaku Daishi. And the translation is from a commentary on the Song of Awakening by Kodo Sawaki Roshi, the teacher of Kosho Uchiyama Roshi. And it goes, "Friend, don't you see this tranquil man of the way, who has attained awakening and ceased studying and acting? He doesn't set aside illusions, and he no longer seeks the truth. The true nature of our ignorance is no other than our Buddha nature. Our empty and illusory body is the Dharma body. When we awaken to the Dharma body, there is no longer anything. Our own original nature is the true and intrinsic Buddha. The clouds of the five aggregates float here and there in vain. The bubbles of the three poisons rise and burst empty. Taken a lot of inspiration from these lines. For me, it means dropping my opinions. When I consider illusions and truth, those are ideas, no substance. What he calls the Dharma body is just this instant. Just us, empty and illusory in this instant. No thought of greed, anger, or ignorance. The five aggregates have no hold here. They are in suspense, as Roshi has often said when we sit zazen. The five aggregates are in suspense. They are suspended. I recently had an online conversation with a Dharma brother around the relationship of scripture study and zazen in practice. I'd been doing a lot of sutra reading and was probably a bit full of myself. And actually, I've spent the summer, really closely reading the Diamond Sutra, and it's strange because that sutra talks against holding thoughts, the illusory nature of thoughts, the unreality of concepts, the emptiness of concepts. And I spent the summer studying that, which was kind of interesting because my head was full of concepts and trying to work my way through it. So my Dharma brother said that it was how one shows up that's important, not so much the extent of one's knowledge. And at the time, that was a little hard to take since I was so deep into study. But it's true. It's how we show up. It's what we do, not so much what we know. So the time was ripe when I heard that. And it changed how I view my life and relationships. So what I want to talk about this morning is my life, which is the Dharma, and which is my world. My wife, Leah, and I live in Lake County in a small community in an alpine valley between Boggs Mountain and Cobb Mountain, both named after white guys who ran the indigenous people off and then extracted timber and carved up the land for sale. Do not know what the native people called where we live. I know they lived there. We live on sediments that have washed down from both mountains to create a valley floor. We get earthquakes quite often, and the shock waves make the house roll as if we're on water. They bounce back and forth the shock waves bounce back and forth between the mountain rocks. We live on 3.5 acres of riparian and forest meadow ecosystems and are blessed by big trees, a grassy field, and a year-round creek for our southern border. I find the idea of borders kind of interesting living in the country. We share space with a lot of other beings, not human. And they come and go with no idea of property until someone throws up a fence. In the forest, that just means a detour of indeterminate length. When I first moved there in 1973, there were really no fences, or maybe a small fenced-in area for a garden to keep the deer out. But over time, as more people have moved up there, the fences have started to appear. We share the land with deer, fox, opossum, raccoons, mountain lions, and bear, with trout, crawdads, the occasional otter family, great blue heron, owls, quail, many other bird species. Redwoods, pines, fir, ash, maple trees, just to name a few. And caring for a piece of land like this requires being out on it daily. Being out on it, change becomes apparent. It's always changing. Nothing really starts, just as nothing really ends. Just an ongoing spiral of evolving activity. Sometimes it's awesome to be in nature. Like now, when the maple trees are changing and the colors are so vibrant. And sometimes it's sad, as when a stand of pine trees dies from bark beetles. It's a beautiful place to live. And now it's a risky place to live. Our community lost 30% of the population after the Valley Fire in 2015. Where we live, right in the bottom of the mountain valley, CAL FIRE calls it the Miracle Mile, because twice the fire went around us, but not through us. My daughter, who lives above us on a ridge, lost her home. My wife, Leah, lost her house in Anderson Springs when the fire roared through that community and burned 90% of the buildings there. There's a sense of resiliency among the people that live here. But there's an underlying anxiety too. Since our fire, we experienced evacuation alerts, evacuation orders, and power outages yearly. Every year we have experienced smoke-filled skies where it's been too dangerous to go outside. And of course, the smoke triggers fear, reactions from running from approaching flames to losing everything. This is living with loss. There's a kind of fatalism in the people here. After our fire and the fires and smoke that followed year after year, and the pandemic and lockdown, where so many businesses didn't survive, so many lives were turned upside down, and then the misinformation that divided an already fragile community consciousness. There's a numbness that comes from being overwhelmed by tragedy after tragedy. And people develop a fear of the future, a fear of change. One of the saddest things I ever heard was when my daughter told me that she didn't think her children would live to see old age. That still chokes me up. And she's not a really the kind of person that tends to over-exaggerate. She's pretty level-headed. And to hear that, her fear is that her children, my grandchildren, will not live to see old age. She hasn't given up on life. She's just sad. Just sad. I take inspiration from her. I take inspiration from my wife, Leah, because both of them are committed to living in service to their communities. And hey, our house needed painting last summer. And in spite of all that, and with much deliberation, we decided to go ahead and have it painted, even though we were looking at a fire season that was coming and we may not have a house. But we went ahead and got it painted anyway. I was surprised at how much stuff I put off, how much I deliberated on doing things. Just, wondering if it was just futile. It was going to be gone anyway. Why bother? Kodo Sawaki Roshi said, gain is illusion, loss is enlightenment. Guang Roshi wrote a whole chapter of no beginning, no end around this theme. The truth of this is made apparent continuously while living and working in nature. This is not a very good example, but over Labor Day weekend, we hosted an outdoor function. And to make parking available, I took the tractor I've got and put a box scraper on the back of it, and instead of mowing down the field behind the house, I took the scraper and just ripped up the land and turned it all to dirt. It was a great parking area. I didn't have to worry about cars driving over dry grass and starting a fire. So I thought that's pretty good. Did a good job there. So after the rains last week, I went out to the field there, and it is a muddy, boggy mess. And so everything that I gained just turned to mud. And what's worse is I realized that in scraping up the ground, I had destroyed a small ecosystem, a very fragile ecosystem on the top of the soil. And I went out walking after the rain, and I was sinking in the mud, and then the mud was like going into a little tributary, and then the mud was from the tributary was going into the creek. And I just thought, well, isn't this just like human activity? We think we're doing something really great, and we end up doing something, really not so great, and really not so great for the things that we are living with. And I think that's sort of the point that I'm trying to get at with this talk. Hopefully it'll be clearer. But we do live in a much larger community, not just a human community. And I think we tend to take, understandably, a human point of view. And I really think stepping back and trying to take a larger point of view really is necessary at this time, because the human point of view just doesn't seem to be working out too well for the most part. What we consider progress doesn't seem to be working out that well. So anyway, I won't make that mistake again. Next time I'll mow. Instead of, mowing's much better. And the other thing is too, that in the spring, I believe that the land will heal itself, and there probably will be good new growth. So it wasn't permanent damage. I would add to this that resisting loss is suffering itself. Change is irresistible, and to go up against it is futile. All I have to do is look in the mirror. How much time and money is spent in trying to hold back time? Still, We have the means to be intimate with time, where the past and future dissolve into an ongoing presence, instant by instant. This is our practice. During the height of the pandemic, a common theme that seemed to be everywhere was when we return to normal, which is sad and funny at the same time. There's no going back. There's no going back. And normal is just an idea. If every moment is new and fresh, how can we go back to? And what do we consider normal? These are just ideas. They have no substance. There's an old saying about not stepping into the same river twice. That's different than saying, let's do that again. How can we do that again? We already did that. Each time is different. Otherwise, we'd be stuck in loops with no way of moving forward. The past becomes comfortable because we know what's going to happen. But life doesn't work that way. We lose moment by moment. But each moment is also fresh and new. In AA, there's a phrase that is used for newcomers who are struggling that says, you can start your day over anytime. This is great wisdom. And it's also a declaration of freedom. We are not changed or fated to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. What a blessing. I'm drawn to extreme and dire views for some reason. When I was a newer student some years ago, I gave a student talk that was probably overly optimistic and Pollyannish-like. In talking Dharma, sometimes I get swept away on a pink cloud, waxing poetic and grand philosophizing, only illuminating one side of the mirror. Neil Myers, who was a senior student at the time, made a comment at one point towards the end of the talk and said, "But John, the world is a dangerous place." It was a vivid moment. My bubble got popped. I can still feel it now. I got totally derailed and didn't have an answer. And I felt that I was in free fall. I remember feeling surprised and sorry for Neil at the time that he had such a negative outlook. Especially since up till then, my experience in the community had always been one of joy and positive attitude. And at the time, I wrote it off to his background of being from an older generation that grew up in the Depression and in the time of war and Holocaust. I remember thinking, yeah, if I had grown up with those things, I'd probably have that feeling too, that the world is a dangerous place. I'd be inclined not to feel too positively about things. I'm not proud of those feelings and judgments that I was making at that time, but his words have stayed with me. And their meaning for me have changed over the years. My white privilege has kept me safe from the catastrophes that are experienced in other parts of the world. I've been hungry by choice, not circumstance. I've been poor by choice, not circumstance. I've not experienced war in my country. I have running water and inside plumbing. I have not really suffered from a lack of anything material. I've been free from the threat of violence. I've had the good fortune to have the time and security to practice Zazen and to study Buddhism in depth. So for me at the time, the world was not a dangerous place. I still feel the world is not a dangerous place. The world is as it is. Of course, if I lived in Syria or some place like Syria, I might feel differently. But I feel the danger in the world lies with us and in us, the human species. We are a danger to the world and all living beings. The world is dangerous to us only to the degree in which we are out of relationship with it, or rather the quality of relationship to it, seeing as how we're always in some kind of a relationship, be it positive or negative, and whether we recognize it or not. If we are taking and not giving back, we put ourselves out of balance and we make ourselves separate. If we are only considering ourselves, then we are out of balance and considering ourselves separate. If we act as if we alone on this planet have worth and act with little or no regard for the natural systems in place, if we act selfishly, we are out of balance. The attitude towards our world is so ingrained in our culture that I don't know if we have the vision or the will to change it. What I feel now is that the world will take care of itself somehow, with, or more likely, without our help. Life is resilient and irrepressible. It wants to live. Life wants to live, and it wants to survive. And what happens when the world, as a collective organism, decides that we pose too great a threat to its existence? During recent times of great uncertainty, like when the fires were burning all around us, I felt that the only safe place was in the city, where the cement and steel wouldn't burn. It occurred to me then that perhaps Gaia, which is the name given to the world system as a whole, that Gaia is herding us into urban areas, much like our bodies isolate an infection. I still feel sometimes that we are an alien species left here without an operating manual. Leah says, maybe I read too much science fiction. But on reflection, I know, actually, she said that when I was reading this back to her. She said, I think you read too much science fiction. But on reflection, I know that a lot of great spiritual teachers have left us operating manuals. The 10 Commandments of the Old Testament, the 2 great commandments of the New Testament, the Quran, and I would imagine most indigenous spirituality all lay out guidelines for successfully living here. For us, it's the Eightfold Path that the Buddha proclaimed as the 4th of the 4 Noble Truths. For those of us who are unfamiliar with the Eightfold Path, they are right view, right intention, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. The first 3 right view, right intention, and right speech make the next two possible, which is right conduct and right livelihood. And this extends into right effort, mindfulness, and right meditation. But they all hinge on right view. This is where you have to start. The irony is that you can have right view through right meditation at the end. So I envision this rather than a linear thing, that the Eightfold Path is more circular. And so that the ending is the beginning. But how does one practice right view? For us, that goes back to the end of the list with right meditation or zazen. I'm feeling a lot of existential angst. While I don't fear the world, I feel a great sadness for what is changing and what is lost. I grieve for the redwood trees on our land, gasping for air in the dry heat of a lengthening summer. I wonder what became of the dragonflies who used to fill the summer skies like an airport when they didn't come this year. I'm grieving for the pine and the fir trees that are succumbing to the predations of insects and blight in large numbers, creating more fuel load for the next fire. I grieve for the live trees that my fearful neighbors are cutting down in an attempt to harden their property against wildfires. Zazen has been an internalizing activity for me for a long time. I find refuge in sitting, quieting my thoughts, calming my body. But not long ago, I came across some wisdom that said we could solve an abundance of problems if we just listened to one another. Not talking to one another, but just listening. Not necessarily agreeing with one another, but just listening. It would seem that our understanding of each other would increase enormously. So I took that into my life, and I'm making an effort to listen more and not to be so free with my opinions and judgments. And taking it into my life also meant taking it into my practice, my zazen. So listening in zazen without thinking or labeling, just listening. It's a wonderful practice. And that practice can continue off the cushion and is an opener to really being present in the world. Plus, I'm finding it easier to be with people who don't share the same worldview with me. Folks are folks, and no one wants to suffer. With the enormity of climate change, the inequality of resource distribution, the assault on truth, racism, etc., how do we keep sane? There is so much in crisis these days that it is impossible and dangerous to try and hold it all. Yet we must. These things can be held lightly with our practice, on and off the cushion. I have found that doing one thing at a time and doing that one thing with wholeheartedness neutralizes any anxiety that I feel. Just doing one thing at a time with attention. I disappear, and only the activity of the present is there. And I also find that in this kind of an attitude, just doing one thing, that one thing always shows up I don't have to look for it. It always makes itself manifest. The next thing that has to be done, next thing that asks to be done, always shows up. This reminds me of the Genjo koan, the part in the Genjo koan where it says, if you're pursuing the Dharma, you're way off track. But if you let the Dharma come in, if the Dharma comes to you, that is true practice. Living with the world is living with the anxieties of the world. But the suffering part can be relieved. If we take the view of the planet, maybe nirvana means something different than what we usually assume. Nirvana traditionally is taken to mean extinguishing, extinction or cessation. We Buddhists take this to mean the extinguishing of the three poisons, anger, greed, and ignorance. The human community is only one of many communities that share the same real estate. Being in harmony with the world might be a better strategy for survival. Zazen is carbon neutral, zero emission, just what the planet needs right now. Thank you.